Okay, so with that, I want to first open up the floor to anyone who has a question about last week's content, this week's content, or anything that you want to ask about. Okay, so we have one question initially from Jenny about the difference between git push and git push origin. So let's run a quick little demo here. So for the most part, let me know if this is too small for you guys. For the most part, when you are working in a Git project, for instance, I think I have CodeTheDream. Okay, so when you have a Git project, there's a concept of a remote, and your remote is the repository somewhere in the cloud where your code is going to get pushed to. So we could use GitHub, that's one possible remote, but there's other tools that we could use as well, like GitLab, which does a lot of the same things, just has a different UI, a couple different features. There's something called Bitbucket. There's a bunch of different options. And so when you have a remote, Git needs to know where that remote is located at a URL. So that's why we do git remote add origin and then some github.com, yada, yada, yada. So what we're doing with this command, which you always do before you can push for the first time, is you are adding your remote, which is saying there's some tool in the cloud that is going to hold my code, and I'm going to add a new one. And I think it's just like the de facto naming standard that we always call it origin. In rare cases, maybe you'd have multiple remotes, like you could push to GitHub and GitLab at the same time if you wanted to have your code in two different places. But generally, you'll have one remote because your code is housed in one place, and seemingly everyone calls it origin. So git push is the command that you run when you commit your code. So you make changes, you commit it, which puts it in a little box and says, this is an update that I need to send to my repository, to my remote. And then you push that commit, and your remote, which for us is going to be GitHub, is going to determine how it's going to apply those changes. So when we do git push, that's a command. If I look at the command git push and I ask for help, it's going to give me a list of all of the different things that I can add to this command. So the command is git push options, which is all of these things. We can add a bunch of different flags. And then we can specify the repository and some other stuff. I honestly don't know what ref spec is. So git push, if you don't have it configured where you're pushing to, you will need to run git push and then specify I'm pushing to my origin remote. And then there's another command that you need, which is what branch are you going to push, which most of the time is whatever branch you're currently on. I think we might have mentioned at the very end of last week that you can run git push set upstream, which says for so if I wrote out this command, what this is saying is I want to push my code and I want to push it to origin and I want to push my master branch. But this set upstream flag means just create a linkage between this branch here on my computer and the same branch up in my remote in origin. And that way, in the future, all you have to do is git push because Git already knows exactly where it's pushing to. It's pushing to origin. It's pushing this branch. So if you run this with set upstream once, then you will be able to git push in the future. But if I just run git push, it's going to tell me that you have no idea like where it's pushing to, and then you have to add the origin and your branch name. Does that make sense? I take follow-up questions too that introduce more questions.
Can you make it an example? Like from VS Code to GitHub?
Yes, let's do the whole process. So I'm going to go in my GitHub here. This is really small. Let me zoom this way the hand. Okay, so I'm going to create a new repository. Let's call this something random, CTD projects demo. Doesn't really matter what. So I'm creating a repository. This is empty. This repository doesn't have anything in it right now, and eventually want to push some code to it. So this is a project that we set up last week. A new React project. So it has our package.json and all that jazz ready to go. But it didn't have any Git associations at this point, because when we create our project, it doesn't know anything about it. So I ran Git init previously. If I do it again, it's going to tell me that it's reinitializing. But when you have an empty project for the first time, you run Git init and it sets up all the files for you. And so now I can do git remote, add origin. So we're adding a new remote, we're calling it origin, and we need to give it the URL where that remote lives. And I want to push it to CTD project demo. So I'm just going to literally copy this whole URL here. Cool. So now if I do git remote, get URL origin, it's going to tell me that that remote, the remote origin, is at this exact URL. And if you didn't know what that command was, you could run git remote -h, and it'll show you all these other things. Git remote rename, remove, get URL, set URL, stuff like that. So we have our remote. We know where our code needs to get pushed. I'm going to run git status, and it shows me that I have a lot of files that are untracked because we just created this repository, so Git doesn't know about them yet. I can add all of them at the same time. So now they should be green. And now I need to commit these changes. So I need to put them in a little box that says these are all related changes. So I'm going to run git commits, and I'm going to pass it a message, and that message is going to be init projects. Cool. So now if I run git status, it's going to tell me there's no changes to be made. And if I run git log, it's going to show me this commit that I just made. So git log is your list of commits that you've made in order. Super, super helpful for if you like mess something up, you can figure out like what Git currently thinks about your project and what you need to fix. And git status is also super helpful. So we have our remote. And now what we can do is, because we have a commit, we want to push that commit. Right now it only exists on our computer. So I could run git push, and this will not work initially. If it works for you immediately, I don't know, maybe you just have something set up already. I wouldn't complain about it as long as it works, but in theory, this should fail the first time, and it'll tell you this current branch master has no upstream branch. Upstream means in your remote, somewhere in the cloud, hosted somewhere, there's no link between this branch here and a branch up there in the remote. And so it'll always give us this command that we can run that will say, just create this branch in my remote and just link the two so I can run git push from here on. So I'm going to git push set up. Actually, let's do this. Let's show you that you can git push always by specifying we push to this remote. We're going to push to origin, which we said was this repository. And we're going to push our master branch is what we're currently. This will work because we're explicitly telling it, there's no link, but we're explicitly telling it that it needs to push our local master to master in this repository. So now if I refresh this, this all exists up here. Let's do a couple things just to show that we can do this. Let's open this in VS Code. And I'm going to create a random file here just to make a change. So maybe I'm going to create temp.txt. or I'm going to try to. If I run git status, it's going to show that we have a change, so we can add this, git commit. Oops. Add file. So now if we run git status, it's going to show us there's nothing new. We have it committed. Git log shows us that we just added this commit. Don't worry for now what like these things on the side mean. They are pretty helpful, but they might be a little confusing. And so now I can run git push set upstream origin master. And this will also work. And this sets our link. And now if you look, when we pushed it the previous time, all it did was write objects to this thing, and it created this branch. There's no other line of text underneath here before we get to the next command. But in this case, because we set the link, there is another line of text at the bottom, and it says branch master, your local branch, was set up to track master in your remote origin. So now there's a link between the two. I can go ahead and delete this file that we just created. It'll show us there's another change. Let's commit this change. Remove file. And now if I just run git push, it already knows where this branch is linked to, and now it'll work. Generally, I think in almost every case, it's safe to set a link. I don't know why you would, in like any case, really take a branch locally that's named something and like push it to a branch in your remote that's named something totally different. That feels like a huge room for error, and I personally haven't had to do that. In general, if you have a master branch on your computer, you probably want to push that code to the master branch in your GitHub. So setting the link is fine, and then you can run git push, and you don't have to worry about the origin master stuff at the end and remembering what that does. I don't think there's any Git instructions per se as part of this curriculum, because I think you, I think the only thing that there would be like in the assignment instructions for weeks 1. Other than that, you'll need to find some online resources. If you don't remember a Git command, that is not like a reflection of you at all. That's just a reflection of the fact that Git is really complicated. And once you do it enough times, you know, go through the workflow, it starts to make a lot of sense, and you build some intuition about, ooh, I need to run this command. But until then, it's expected that you will forget Git commands. And so always use Stack Overflow. It's a great resource. I do it all the time, even at work. Yes, you do need to create branches as part of your assignment. So you should be creating a branch for each week as you're adding the next part to your project. And you can push that branch up to your GitHub the exact same way we just did this. So this is on the master branch. I could create a new branch and call this feature 1. Oops. Let's do that. And then I will move on to that branch. And I could make any changes I want here. Let's reintroduce that file just to be super interesting. So now on this branch, we have one change. Bring back. And if I run git push, this is a new branch, and this branch doesn't have any links set up. Only our master branch does. So I would need to set up a link on this branch that says, okay, my feature 1 branch locally, I want you to push to feature 1 in GitHub in your remote. And this will work. This will push to a separate branch.
I have one question regarding the last command. Can I?
Sure.
So what is the difference between the command you type and the command git push origin and the branch name?
Git push branch name.
Git push origin and branch name.
Okay. So this is the same command. There's only one command, git push, And then you can optionally specify your remote, which we're saying is origin. That's the remote that we added that points to this URL here. And this branch name, which right now is feature one, but when we were doing this earlier on the other branch, on our master branch, that branch was called master. And the only time where you don't specify origin and your branch name is once you have already run this command once with set upstream. This is a flag. So this doesn't change the command. This is just like an optional thing that you can add. If you want to, if it makes more sense intuitively, you could put it at the end. And then we see that this is still the same command, git push origin branch name, but we're adding an option to it, which tells Git to do something else. And it sets a link between whatever this branch that we specified is locally and the same branch up in the cloud in our remote. And then from here on out, once that link exists, we don't have to tell it every single time, I want you to push to this remote to the same branch, and we can just run git push. These other two things are no longer required once we have a link because it already knows where it's pushing. These two are just to tell it, okay, this branch that I'm currently on, where do I want to push it to? I want to push it to origin, and I want to push it to the master up there.
So means for first time when we are pushing our code to the GitHub, we need to use the first command. But later, till the time we do not submit the code, we can only use the git push command.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. You only have to use this flag one time, and then every other time when you're on that branch, just git push will work.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Just one more question regarding the submission of the assignment. Can I?
Sure.
So before submitting the assignment, we also need to create the pull request and also we need to fork the repository. Can you just show how to do that?
Yes, this was something that I saw a bunch of people struggling with in the Grackle discussion. So this is a good thing to cover for sure. So let's talk about what the process looks like for getting your assignment reviewed and kind of why we do that. Let me get this out of my way here. Okay, so right now, the last thing we did was we created a new branch called feature one, and we added something to it, and then we pushed that branch. So this branch now also exists in our repository. So if I look at this, this is our master branch. This is the old code that we have from before we started on this week's assignment. And I can see in here that there's a feature one branch as well. And this has an extra file that we created, temp.txt. So this is new code. This is like after I've done my assignment for the week. I have new code that doesn't exist in my master branch. So what I'm going to do to submit my assignment is I'm going to go up to pull requests, and I'm going to create a new pull request. Sometimes if you push the branch like very recently, it'll have that bubble at the top that says compare and pull to just save you some clicks. And that totally works. We're just going to do it the long way, just so that you understand the whole process. So a pull request says, I have one branch which has additional code, additional commits, and I want to add those commits and put it directly back into my master branch, which holds like my stable version of the code. You might experiment with some stuff on different branches and decide, oh, that doesn't work, it's not going to be okay, and then you can get rid of the branch. Or you might experiment with stuff and say, ooh, I like this, but I want to hold on to this for a little while, and I don't want to use it in my code just yet. I want to come back to it later. Or in your case for this assignment, you've implemented a new feature that you do want to now put into your like master branch, your stable copy of the project. Once you know that you're finished, that's when you take your feature branch and you put it into your master. So what we do with a pull request is we say, this compare branch needs to go into this base branch. I want to take my new feature branch and I want to merge it into my stable base, which for us is master. Depending on how your GitHub is set up, this might be main instead of master. That's totally fine. It's just a setting on people's accounts. I use master just because that's what it was when I started using Git a couple years ago, but they've changed it since. So now it's main by default. So yours might say main here instead of master. Mine says master. They're the same thing. So you're taking your feature branch. This arrow indicates that this is going into this branch. So if I do this the other way around, it's going to tell me that there's nothing to compare because this is an older version of this. So it doesn't make sense to merge it in. You want to merge in new code that will go into your stable branch. And once you have the correct relation here, it'll show you all the things you want to do. So it's showing me I have one commit that's going to be added and it changed one file. It's going to give us all this really helpful information. So I'm going to hit create pull request. And you can write a description. Maybe if you have a note that you want to submit to your reviewer, this would be a good place to leave it. Add a title here that specifies like what this branch is and why you're trying to merge it in. So like completed lesson 2 assignments. Cool. And once you've done that, you can hit create pull requests. And so this opens a pull request. It'll say open, which means someone can do it. And it'll tell you that you're merging into master from your feature branch, which is what we expect. And you can add comments. You can have a discussion with your reviewer by adding comments and they respond to them and you respond to them. That's great. Definitely do that if you need to. We're going to ignore this require approval since we don't want to set up any like really complicated settings here. All we want to note is that this branch has no conflicts and there's a big green button that says merge pull request. When you click this, your branch will take any new code and stick into your master branch. And that's, it's not permanent, like it's fixable, but like that's the breaking point. Once you do that, then you move on to your next assignment. You look at your master branch, you create a new branch for your new feature, and then you start working on that and you go and do the whole process all over again. You should not click this button until your reviewer has told you this code is okay to merge. Or has, like when you submitted your form to your reviewer, they will approve it and you'll get an email that it's approved and then you're safe to merge it. You should not merge it until then so that if your reviewer sees something that they would like you to change or a suggestion that might be helpful to improve your code, they're going to do that and then they're going to hit on the form like needs some revision and they'll tell you I left a comment in your merge request. And so you'll know you need to go back over here and look at your request here. And you can address anything you want. And because this pull request exists, if I were to go into this file and maybe add some content, just some random text, and I go into my Git terminal and I run git status. Oop. So it's telling me I have some modifications. I can add this. I'm going to make another commit, add it to text file. And I can push this. So now I have 2 commits on this branch that don't exist on master. I've done 2 things. And you'll see this automatically updated for me. So now this pull request says, well, there's 2 commits on this branch that I'm going to put into the master when this gets approved. So once you've created your pull request, you don't have to do anything else to it until you're ready to merge. If you need to make any changes, make those changes, add another commit, push that commit, it will automatically be part of your pull request. And then you can email or message on Slack your reviewer and say, hey, I made the changes you wanted. Can you let me know if there's anything else? And they'll say, great, I'm glad you did that. I approve. And then you're good to hit the merge pull request. You should generally, the workflow should be, don't start on the next assignment until this assignment has been merged. That will be the easiest way to do it, because then when you start on your next assignment and you create a new branch, you'll just have all of the updates from your previous merge request once it gets merged in. But if you're in a hurry or your reviewer is taking a long time, you can absolutely start working on the next assignment before this gets merged in. But it can be kind of tricky because you'll have some code that maybe your next assignment builds on. So something you wrote in this assignment, your next assignment is going to change that code. But if you haven't merged this in, then that code doesn't exist yet in your master branch. So like, how do you build on that? So if you can, try and let this get merged in before you start on the next assignments. But if you absolutely need to, you can talk with your reviewer and they can help you figure that out. And let's finish this out really quick. So let's say my reviewer said, great, you did a good job. I like that. So I'm going to confirm the merge and hit that button. And now it's telling me the pull request has been merged and closed. And this branch can be safely deleted. So now our master branch has all of the same code as this branch. They are one and the same. And so this feature one branch isn't useful anymore. So I could delete it if I wanted to. And I think I will, just for fun.
This is a pull request for one branch only. It doesn't include the if you create another branch for another lesson, it won't like pull like merge the other one, right?
Nope.
You have the pull
Pull
request,
request is only 2 branches, and that never changes. You specify which branch, only feature 1 is going into master. Those are the only branches affected. So if you have a feature 2 branch that you started working on before it got merged, that will be totally unaffected. It will still exist exactly the same. Any other questions while we're here? Okay, so let's see what this pull request did. So if I go into my code, which goes into the main part of this Git repository, you will see if I go up here and click on all the commits that are part of this branch, that it includes the 2 commits that were a part of that branch that got merged in. And it will also have this other commit that it adds that just signifies to you, yes, this pull request did get merged in properly. So these 2 were part of the branch that we merged, and then this one is generated by GitHub. It doesn't actually do anything. I don't think there's any code changes as part of this. Maybe not. Anyway, the code will be exactly as you expect. You don't need to worry as long as you see this commit up here and the 2 that you're expecting to be there. So now, if I go into my feature 1 branch, it'll still have those 2 commits, and we're done with this. We don't need this branch anymore. So if I really wanted to, I could go into view all branches, and it is now safe, especially when you see this purple. Purple means it's been merged. It is now safe. If you want to delete it, you can. You don't have to. It doesn't matter. Like, it'll just sit there harmlessly, but it is safe to delete if you want to. So I'm going to go into my master branch, and I can now git pull, and that will pull any commits to this branch. So we merged it into the master, but it only merged it in this GitHub remote. It doesn't affect your computer automatically. You have to pull down the changes when there's new things in your master branch. So now if I run git log, it'll show us that we have these 2 commits, which we added from our feature 1 branch. And we also have this commit that GitHub generated for us. So this is now up to date with our master branch in GitHub, which is great. And so now I still have a copy of that feature 1 branch locally, and I don't need that anymore either. This one I would definitely delete once you're finished with them and you're like confident that you have the code. Definitely if you're like, still trying to figure out if the merge actually worked, do that first. But once you're confident that you merge the pull request and everything looks good, your master branch is exactly what you expect, you should probably delete your old branches so that you don't see them like 3 weeks later and you're like, do I still need that? Am I keeping it around for any particular reason? Like, does it have code that hasn't been merged yet? Like, is there a reason why I have it? And this is 18 weeks. There will be a lot of assignments when you run Git branch. If you don't clean them up, this will be an enormous output by the end of the semester. I personally don't like that. I'm a little OCD. I like to keep my branches only what I need and what I'm currently working on. But whatever makes sense to you, whatever your preference is, stick with that. And so now, once I have this merged in, I can do git branch feature 2 and check out my feature 2 branch. And if I look at this, because I created it as a copy of the master, it has all the same commits as the master. And so it's up to date now. And I can go ahead and start working on my assignment number 2. All right, let me check and see if there's anything else in Zoom. Feel free to pipe in with any questions. Yeah, this is very confusing. Feel free to come back to this recording later. Hey, Jordan, I saw you just joined recently. Can you go into, and this is for anyone else who hasn't done this already, can you go into the agenda page, which I linked in my Slack announcement for this in the morning? Can you hit the agenda and then fill out this sign-in form here with your first name and last name? And there's 2 really short questions that'll just help me plan for future weeks. There were so many of you last week, and there's so many of you this week that it's kind of overwhelming, and trying to like individually type out your names is very hard, and I'm going to miss some of you, which is unfair. So this will help me take attendance a lot easier and more accurately. So just do that really quick.
No problem.
Okay, someone else had a question?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay.
When we create new components for React and like we open a separate file for those components, are there certain imports that we should just have already?
No. If you create a new file, it'll just be a blank file until you need to use something. So right now, the only component we have is this app.jsx. And these imports are only things that are required because we wrote this particular code. If you create a new file, it'll just be a JavaScript file until you need something else. So I could create a component called my component here, JSX. Let me split screen this just so you can see in comparison to our app.js. I could literally write this. And this is a completely valid JavaScript component, a React component. No imports required unless you need them for any particular reason. I could use this right here. It would be invisible because there's nothing in here, but this is a valid component and will not error. The imports that are here, this is styles from this style sheet. So if you have any styles you want to apply to this component, you could import that style sheet. And then these are all just assets that are used by this particular component. This up here is the one that might kind of throw people for a loop. We haven't talked about state yet, but I think we do that sooner rather than later. So that's maybe a couple weeks down the line. And state is a way that we can like manage data inside of a component without it getting lost. So React is really cool because every time a component changes, it re-renders the component automatically for you. So it'll always be up to date. And that's a really powerful feature that React offers that is like you'd have to manually implement if you were writing just vanilla JavaScript and HTML. And again, I think in this next week where we talk about the DOM, it'll make a little more sense why that's a powerful feature. But state, if you don't make a piece of data state, then when your component re-renders, it will clear any data that's not saved to a state variable, and you'll lose it. So state is how we would keep data between all the different renders of our component, which is going to be so many. And this is something that React provides to us, specifically the React library. So that's why this is getting imported. So ignore this for now. And you don't have to import anything until you see something that is important to import.
Okay. I have a second question.
Go for it.
When we're using arrow functions, it says in some cases, you don't even need to use return. And I understand that part, but I wanted to ask like an example, like in a real life kind of project when you would have to keep the return.
Yes, this is also a good question. Let's talk very briefly about what you're referring to so that everyone else gets context. And then while we're doing that, I will frantically try and come up with an example of where that would fit well. Okay, so let's do this. So there's a couple of different ways of creating a function in JavaScript. We can either do it by using the function keyword and then saying the name of the function and parameters. If you want to add parameters, so that's data you're passing into the function that you can use. And we don't know what that data is going to be. So this is just a variable for all intents and purposes. And let's say I console.log param1. This function doesn't have a return statement. So we don't have to like add a return some value down here. But if our function was doing something more impressive, then we would need to add a return statement. The other way of declaring this function that is exactly the same is using an arrow function. And an arrow function looks like, to use the exact same things that we're using in this other function, we use parentheses and any parameters we want to pass in there, and then an arrow, which just says this is a function, but this function has no name. Anonymous function, arrow function. There might be one other term for referring to this, but those are the main two. Those mean the exact same thing. It means a function that doesn't have a name. It's basically just a thing that exists. Yes, I can make it larger. That's the one thing that I didn't make large from the last example. Thanks for the reminder. So these are exactly the same, but because this function doesn't have a name, we can't refer to it. We can't call this function. So what we need to do here if we're using an arrow function is we need to assign it to a variable. And we could call this variable my function. And now, if I want to call this, I could do my function, pass it in some value. And in either case, it will be exactly the same. So these two functions are completely equivalent, and this call will work for either. The reason why arrow functions exist, like this isn't really any shorter than just using the function keyword. In fact, it honestly is even longer, probably. It's more keystrokes just because like it extends further in the line. So probably it's even more. So you might be asking like, well, why on earth would I want to do this then? And the answer is that functions in JavaScript are like any other piece of data. So if I had a variable, my age, I could set this to a number. A number is a type of data that can go into a variable. I could also set this is tall true. But I can also, I can assign a function to a variable. And I could do this like this too. And so this also works. Or I could use an arrow function here. And so this is a powerful concept that your function is basically like any other piece of data. What is actually happening here is we are taking this function and declaring it and giving a reference to that function and storing it into this variable. So a reference just means I am pointed at this function, which exists somewhere in memory on my computer. It's declared, it's being stored somewhere on my computer. And a reference just says, this is where that function is. And so when I do compute age, you might think, oh, I'm just calling a function that's declared. You are getting the reference to this function, which gets the function, and then executing the function. So that's what this means. That's why this also works, even if it's an arrow function versus just like a function keyword. So what we can do with this is we can pass an arrow function as an argument to another function. And the way this normally works in vanilla JavaScript is you have my elements or something, and you do document.get element by ID some element. So you have some HTML element and you've selected that element and you've stored a reference to that HTML element in this variable. And JavaScript is an event-based language primarily, which means your script runs once from start to finish. And during that time, you subscribe to events. So you can add event listeners to elements that will trigger on certain events. So if I click on this element, I want to execute some function. And we specify in this what function are we going to execute when this happens. And your script will run through and it'll call this and it'll register this listener that you're adding. And it'll continue executing and then the script will finish. But it will continue living beyond the termination of your script because we added this listener. And so I could declare a function in here if I want to. And when I declare a function, it automatically gives me a reference to it, which then goes into this second argument for this function. So the second argument is a reference to this function that's going to do something. Maybe I console.log, you clicked this button. And this works. This is totally fine. And we could also like declare a function at the highest level so that we could use it a bunch of times. Like maybe this is a reusable function. Console.log do something multiple times. So this is a function maybe we call from several different places. And we could also specify the name of the function here and give it a reference to that function that already exists. This is also fine. Lots of ways of doing the same thing. But an arrow function is really cool because we can just declare it in line here. We're only going to use this function one time. It only does one thing. We're not using it elsewhere in the code. And so we're just going to declare an arrow function that does a thing here. So we don't need to give it a name. This is shorthand. This does it really quickly. It's very easy. No problem. So this still hasn't mentioned anything about returning from a function. In an arrow function, in general, if we want to return something, let's say we're passing in a value. This is our multiplier, and we return 5 times multiplier. Maybe we do some other cool stuff up here, like we log doing something by func. Maybe we call a different function from up here. We do all kinds of stuff. And at the very end, we have some piece of data we're returning. This function has multiple different things that it's executing. This has like 3 different statements and they all have to be on their own line. However, if the only thing we're doing is one statement and it immediately returns that thing as a result of that statement, then we don't need curly braces around the function and we can do this in one line. And we don't need a return statement either. So this is a function that executes 5 times whatever this parameter is and then immediately returns the value. And that we can call, and if we passed in 5 here and then we console.logged this, which I don't really have a great way of executing this, otherwise I would. Actually, maybe we can do this. Let me try this really quick. Here, that's not gonna work. All right, so if I go into source and I run node my component, let me make this just a JavaScript file instead for a second. JSX node will not know what to do with that because it's not vanilla JavaScript, but I can say node execute this file for me. And what it'll do is it'll call this function with a value 5. It'll multiply it by 5 and return the value immediately, which we then log. And so that's why we get 25 down here. So that's what it means when we have an arrow function and we don't use curly braces. It means we're only doing one thing and we're immediately returning the value. If we did multiple things, then we would need to use curly braces and do the other stuff inside of there. And we could do this anyway if it makes you feel better and it's easier to understand what's going on. You can still use curly braces and just return. I do this sometimes just because I think it's more readable, but it all just depends on what you're going for. As for where you would use this, I don't know that I can show you a good example right now in vanilla JavaScript. I think the best examples would come from where they get used in a React component. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds and lose you guys yet. But there will be many cases where maybe you have a component like app.jsx and you have a component, say this button here, and you only have one thing you want to execute. In this case, it's saying on click, this is some property that goes onto buttons that says when you click on this button, do this thing. And it takes a function, a reference to a function that it will execute in the future. It's an event that's going to happen in the future. It doesn't happen right now, but it's going to happen when that button is clicked in the future. We're giving it an arrow function here, a reference to this function to execute in the future. And because we're only doing this in one place, we only want to do this thing when this particular button is clicked. We don't have to like declare it somewhere else or give it a name. We can just do shorthand and give it an arrow function. And then we do our thing. This is sort of a overly complex example. I'm going to simplify this just for the sake of understanding. It executes this thing and it returns whatever is the result of executing this. This function is a void function. We don't know about state yet, but this doesn't give you anything back. If you hover over it in VS Code, it'll tell you that this function takes in a parameter value, which is this really complicated garbage type that probably doesn't mean anything yet. And it executes and then gives you back nothing. It gives you back void. So we can also use this shorthand if we have one statement we want to execute, regardless of whether it returns something back or not. And so that's why they would use it here. Because otherwise what we would have to do is we'd have to declare curly braces and then like indent onto another line to show that it's something that executes. And I don't know, it's up to personal preference. This whole feature of like one line, one statement is totally avoidable if you just always want to use curly braces. But generally, like if it's one small little thing that needs to run, maybe you're passing a value to a component, but it depends on something else, and you like do a little operation to it, then you probably would put that as a single line arrow function inside of your parameters. That was like a really long, complex explanation that was mostly just like, what is an arrow function? But does that like kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Because I guess my real question was like, yeah, like when do we know when to use it and when to not? But now like it makes sense. Like if you're only using it one time for one certain thing, like an arrow function would be more useful. Yeah.
Yeah, some people will use an arrow function for literally every function they write. I don't think you need to do that. If you really like arrow functions and you want to stick to something, by all means. But generally, it's like you're using it one time. Maybe it's being passed to a different component, or you're adding a listener to something. That's when is a prime candidate for an arrow function. That's what they're made for. How can we get more familiar with these React syntax / function writing to build into muscle memory? It's a good question. I think it will naturally happen as we get further into this class. It is expected in week 2, where you're learning how to create a function, that you will not understand like everything about what you're writing, or it will not feel natural, at least, even if you do understand what's going on, and you'll have to reference the book. That's just how learning anything works. And once you do it enough times, it starts to make a lot of sense. So practice is definitely good. I think you'll get most of the practice you need from just working on this project. Certainly, if you're working on one particular lesson and you're like, well, I don't like think I fully get this yet, but I've already finished this lesson and I've done all the things it asked me to. You can always go above and beyond and like start adding some other stuff. Maybe you're not feeling comfortable with creating a component from scratch, then come up with something else that you can add into your project and make a component for that. I don't think any reviewer will have any problem with you doing more work than is required by any particular week. It's highly encouraged, and being able to like see the gears turning and see things clicking over multiple weeks as a reviewer, like when students go from sort of having difficulty with some stuff, and then by the end they're like totally, flying solo, adding all these really cool features. It's really rewarding for us personally. So I would highly encourage you guys to take as much practice as you need, both with this project, add some extra stuff if you want to practice, or if you really would like to, if you think that would be helpful in future weeks, we can just like do the content from the previous week again in a real world scenario. That's what I would like to do if we have enough time during most weeks, because I think it's the most immediately helpful. There will be some concepts, especially in future weeks, once we get into some more complicated like React stuff, that just like you might be able to syntactically write it based on what the book is telling you, but the actual use case for why you would want to do that is going to be like totally out there. Like, where would this ever possibly be useful? And so if we work on a side project in the time that we have at the end of our sessions after we answer questions, we obviously don't have time for that today, but in future weeks, we can sort of like build a separate project, maybe like an Amazon clone or like a little simple social media platform, and sort of incorporate all these ideas and get extra practice writing certain statements, certain functions, talking about like the intuition of why we want to do this versus something else, and like where things really fit into the bigger picture of working on a real project. I think that was really helpful both for me to like really have to dig into like, okay, where can I fit this feature that we're learning, this concept, into a real application, so that we can talk about it as a group. And I think it was really helpful for my students last summer, to sort of like get some extra practice with especially some of the more complicated stuff. So if you think that would be helpful, we can absolutely try and do that. Like include that in your form submission if you haven't already done the sign-in form today. Or if it's too late and you can't go back in and edit it, I don't actually know if I have that set up. Just like shoot me a message and say, hey, I really want to do this. Next week I was having difficulty with this concept. Can we talk about it some more? And we will absolutely do that. So always feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about it. Cool. All right, I got a couple minutes left. If you are happy, feel free to jump off. Thank you for sticking with me for an hour while I just ramble at you guys. I'll see you next week, maybe, and have a good weekend. If you have any other questions, feel free to stick on. I'm here as long as you guys need me to be. But have a good night for everyone else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
I assume the hand raised means that you have a question. And if that's the case, go for it.
Yes. Hi, Elijah. This is my first time on your class. I just wanted to ask a quick question. I have the local host on the port 5500, and I just wanted to know how can I switch it to a different port without doing a manual typing in my browser? If I
Yes.
can.
So React has a specific port that it's going to use by default, which you don't really have a whole lot of control over what React is going to try and do. So what we need to do here is we need to specify a environment variable that tells React use a different port.
Do you think I can just share my screen and you can just walk me through that?
Sure. Yeah, we can try and figure this out.
Okay, 1 second. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
So I'm using the live server over here, and it says 5500, and I'm manually changing it to a different one. To this one, 5173.
Okay.
Uh,
So 5173 is not what you want to set it to?
By default, it's opening on 5500.
Okay.
And it's not my React app.
Okay. Can you go back into, I don't even know. So the concept of a port is like on your host, on your computer, you have processes that listen to a specific port so that each process can accept traffic to your website that is clearly intended for only that website. So listening to a specific port means the only thing that can possibly be running on this port is your application. And by default, I guess it's 550. So unless you like manually override that when you're starting up your app, I don't even know how you can possibly go to a different port and like actually see something. So did you like set 5173 somewhere in your code or in,
Nope.
like, your config files, or you just went to that URL?
I think it's done by Vite. I'm not sure, but I assume that's where it opens up when you install it with Vite React app.
Okay.
I don't know how it. This is my first time using Vite. Before I used to play with the Create React app, and it always was on a 5500.
Yeah.
Or
Okay, so let's do this. Let's start from scratch and just so I can see the whole startup process. Can we close whatever you have open in your browser? And if you're running your app, can you close out of that in your terminal? If it's running from a terminal.
yeah, I'm using the terminal from VS Code.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I'm just running the command.
Hold on. It looks to me if you go in the right side of your terminal, there's 3 different terminals that are open. So there's one
Yeah,
that says node, which means it's a running process. Can you click on that so we can see what it is?
I can just shut it down.
Oh, this is your other React app that's open.
Probably.
Okay, yeah, let's shut that down. Just so we don't have any confusion.
How do I? I'm sorry. How do I do that?
You
Or
have
you
to
can right click.
scroll down the vertical line little bit on the left. You have to scroll down the vertical line.
Vertical line on the left.
Yes. So the line between your terminal and the
It just said kill the terminal.
Yeah, I just can kill the terminal.
Yeah, I think that'll also work. There's
All
usually
right.
like an icon there, like a trash icon. But
Yeah,
I think it
yeah,
was hiding
I
it because
remember
your
that.
terminal was really small.
Right over here.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just have one question before you go ahead. Why you go live for the wheat project? Like you
Uh,
have to run the project by using the commands, not by using the go live.
sorry, say it one more time.
So when we run the React projects with maybe with the create React app or maybe with the white, do we go with the go live option or do we need to use the commands to run the application?
I would always try and run the necessary commands in your terminal just so that you're always doing it the same way. And that way we're doing things correct. I noticed you clicked something on the bottom that like had a port number on it, which I don't actually know what that did. So we'll find out.
Yeah,
Go
that's the
live.
live server. That's the live server. I'm using the extension.
Ah, I've never done this before. I don't actually have any idea what go live does,
So
but I'm guessing that's probably the
have the
source of whatever this problem is.
sorry to interrupt, but it is for the JavaScript files only, not for the React files. If you run the plain
Mm,
HTML and JavaScript code, you can
okay.
go with the go live option. But for the React app, with maybe any version like Wait or the Create React app, you have to run the build commands.
Yeah, run
I think that's
dev
probably
npm
true.
run dev.
Yeah. NPM run dev will run it through Vite.
So which one? NPM run dev?
Yeah. So dev is a script that's been defined in your package.json, and we're saying
Mm-hmm.
run the dev script, which tells Vite, go ahead and do your thing. And so if you execute this, it'll show you that it's running on 5173. And if you go to,
Right, right.
that's where your React app lives. It shouldn't live
Okay,
on any other host, on any other
all
port.
right. Got it. So actually, you're just saying that I'm copy pasting in my browser this link and it will open up the localhost, right? With this address
Mhm.
and
Or if you hit control and then just hover over that, you should be able to click on
yeah.
it and it'll open it for you.
All right.
That way you don't have to copy paste it, which is annoying.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was wondering if you know this live server and if we can just change the settings for that. Well, I'll Google it or ask ChatGPT. Thank
Yeah.
you.
It would be nice if you could just like click on it and it would work. I honestly have no idea how Go Live works. I've never used that before. Clearly, you guys know this better than I do overall. So it would be worth a Google for sure, just to see if you can set it up
I
properly.
think go live is for JavaScript.
Like if you were running just like a node project, like vanilla.
Not Node, only JavaScript and only HTML, not any framework.
Oh,
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I was using it for my testing projects for test automation on web applications. So that's why.
Gotcha.
All
Yeah,
right. Well,
definitely worth a
thank
Google.
you.
Yeah, of course.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks to everyone else for the assist on figuring this one out.
Yeah, thank
Anyone
you.
else have any questions?
I'm also confused about like when so you just get you create in your GitHub, you create repo and then you clone it down. After you clone it down, you make like changes and you get init and you get add, and then you get commit, and then you when you want to push it up, you put get push origin, and then the first time, I think you put upstreams, right?
Yeah, set
Upstream,
upstream the flag.
upstream, like the whole thing, right? You're supposed to push the whole repo, right? Not just the branch or like lessons or
You
whatever.
don't ever push a whole repo at a time. When you git push, it's only ever pushing whatever's on your current branch, any new changes. So your whole repo isn't changing. It's only the branch you're on, and you're specifying where it needs to get pushed to. I want
So
to
I had
push.
to, so I had to push, I had to specify that branch, right? When I
Yeah.
push it.
So you would theoretically in your first try, you would git push to say, I'm on my current branch. I want to push my new code from this branch that exists on my computer. And I'm going to set my upstream, which means link it for me automatically. And then you would put origin and then the name of the same branch that you're on, which is saying push to origin, which exists somewhere in the cloud, and create that link and push my local branch to the branch named master or feature or whatever, the same name. So you're saying push my local copy of this branch to the remote copy of this branch.
But like if for some like for my first lesson, I just push and it just I
Yeah.
think I think when I push I was on the lesson branch, but when I push it, it didn't give me that error saying that I need to have to upstream or origin. It didn't say that, so I don't know what's going on.
I don't have like a firm idea, but my guess is when you just mentioned that you cloned your project, what we
Aren't we
did
supposed
is
to clone it?
we created an empty repository as part of this exercise, and then your empty repository just existed in the cloud. We didn't have anything to do with it, and we created our project locally and Git init like just sets up your local project, and then we had to like link the two projects by adding a remote and setting the link between the two branches.
No, I thought the instruction was to like create a empty repo in GitHub, and then we clone it down to our local machine, and then we work on it, and then we get in it, and then you get add and then get push it up. It's
Yeah.
not. It's
So
not what the
cloning is the
instructions.
other way to also set up your project. And if that's what the instructions tell you to do, definitely do that. Cloning just says, I already have a project that exists in GitHub. Pull that down, create my Git project locally for me. So you shouldn't have to run Git init if you run Git clone. Git clone says like, grab this project that exists remotely.
Yeah, I
pull
no
all
getting
the
it.
code.
Sorry. Yeah, no
And
getting
in
it.
that case, because you've cloned it from a specific place, Git probably just sets up all of those links for you automatically. Like you don't have to specify the upstream. You don't have to create a new remote. You probably don't need to do either of those because Git already knows where it came from because that's what you were doing. You were cloning something that already existed. In our case, because we were starting from scratch locally, we had to set those links, which is when that flag is required. If you run git push and it doesn't tell you to do anything, that's not a bad thing. It just means that link already exists from something else, probably from a clone. Definitely not a problem that you don't have to do that.
Okay, so one way is this like create the empty repo in GitHub, and then we close down. Another way, we create locally on a computer, and then we push it up and push it up. When we push it up, we have to also create a empty repo GitHub, and then we push it up to upstream to link to that repo that we create in GitHub.
Yeah. So you clone it, you create it, you clone it, and then you push any new code, and it already knows that it's pushing to that empty repo that you cloned.
No. I'm saying that there's two ways. One way is to create start from scratch in your computer, and then we push it up, right? Push it
Yes.
up, use upstream, and then it'll probably create you still have to create empty repo
Yes.
in
You
GitHub,
do
right?
still
For
have
that
to
one.
have an empty
Okay.
repo.
Okay, all right. Okay, I see. Is that if we start from scratch in our computer, we need to put upstream remote something like that, right? Those
Yes.
both of
If
them.
you
Okay.
start just from scratch instead of from cloning, then you will have to set those links by adding your remote. Set upstream when you push so that the branch knows where it's going. Great. if there's more questions, feel free to leave them in the Slack discussion. You're not the only person that's having difficulty with this, for sure. Anyone else while we're here? You're very welcome. All right, well, I will see you guys next week. If anything comes up, feel free to grab a one-on-one mentor or shoot me a message. I'm always available. All right, have a good weekend, guys.
Bye.